So, you've likely bumped into the term mutual aid lately,
hmm
maybe scrolling online, or seeing news clips when things get tough.
Yeah, definitely. It tops up a lot, especially during crises. People talking about communities stepping up.
Right. And it sort of feels obvious, people helping people. But what's really going on there? Is there more to it than just like kindness?
There is actually. While helping is part of it, mutual aid, especially in the way organizers think about it, it's, well, it's deeper. It's got a specific meaning, a history, even a kind of political point.
Okay, so it's not just random acts.
Not really, no. It's framed as more deliberate.
Got it. And that's exactly what we want to dig into today. We're looking at Dean Spade's book, Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next. Specifically, some key bits from it.
Hmm.
Our goal here is to kind of pull out the main ideas to get what mutual aid means beyond just helping. Spade frames it as, a strategy for survival, for change.
Yeah, and based on this source, we'll unpack the core concepts, how Spade says it's different from, say, charity, some common problems groups run into, and how the work actually happens on the ground.
Okay, let's jump in. So, Spade's definition: collective coordination to meet each other's needs.
Mhm.
What strikes me there is the context he adds.
Right. It often happens because the usual systems aren't working, or sometimes they're even causing the problems.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Absolutely. According to Spade, the understanding behind it is crucial. It's not just seeing isolated problems. People recognize these needs are often bigger, systemic, rooted in injustice.
So instead of waiting for, I don't know, the government or whoever, people just act together.
Pretty much. They act together to meet those needs directly, especially if they see the official channels as part of the issue.
So it's getting people stuff they need: food, housing, whatever, but also talking about why they need it, that link.
Exactly. That's central to Spade's argument. Meet the immediate need and build a shared analysis of the root causes. Why do people lack these things? It's about connecting that personal struggle to the bigger picture, building solidarity along the way.
That reminds me of the example Spade uses from history. It's not just recent stuff.
No, not at all.
He mentions things like fundraising for strikers, rides during the bus boycott, community medic training, abortion support networks, prisoner support.
Yeah, things that go beyond just being nice. They were part of wider struggles.
Deliberate acts.
Absolutely. And Spade really highlights the Black Panther Party's survival programs, free breakfast, clinics, rides for seniors.
Right, those were famous.
Yeah, and he argues they did two things: met real essential needs and created spaces for organizing, for building that collective political understanding, directly challenging, the stigma around poverty and racism.
And he traces it back even further, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Saying it's not some new idea, but like an ongoing tradition, especially referencing indigenous communities.
Yes, presenting it as practices for collective survival, self-sufficiency, almost as resistance against colonial systems designed to create dependency.
So that history gives it weight. It's a strategy, not just a reaction.
Exactly. A strategy for survival, particularly when facing systems that marginalize people.
Okay, so Spade lays out three key elements that make mutual aid distinct. We've touched on the first one: meeting needs while analyzing root causes. What else?
So the second thing, according to the book, is that these projects mobilize people. They expand solidarity. They build movements.
How's that different from, say, a typical nonprofit?
Well, Spade contrasts it. He argues some nonprofits can get focused on narrow issues, maybe specific deserving groups, and they might adopt tactics that don't really rock the boat, that are acceptable to those in power.
That point about deserving is interesting. Spade seems quite critical of that.
He is. He argues that focusing help only on, like, innocent victims or maybe nonviolent people caught in the justice system, it can actually prop up the system. Because it implies it's okay for the system to target the other people, the ones labeled guilty or violent. Real solidarity, he argues, means connecting across different issues, different experiences of being pushed to the margins.
So, like, if a group working on homelessness sees the links to racism, healthcare access, policing, immigration, it pushes them towards bigger change.
Exactly, towards a broader vision of transforming society, not just managing one problem in isolation.
Okay, so 1, needs plus analysis. 2, mobilize plus build movements. What's number 3?
The third element Spade emphasizes is that mutual aid projects are participatory. They solve problems through collective action. It's not about waiting for outside saviors, government, rich donors, even experts with degrees.
So everyone involved is learning practical stuff. Organizing, handling money, running meetings, sorting out disagreements.
Yeah, there's that skill building. But Spade seems to think it's more fundamental. It's about people realizing their own collective power, their ability to act.
Learning they don't need permission, basically.
Right, learning they can identify a problem and work with others to fix it, without waiting for some authority figure. He frames this as inherently anti-authoritarian. It's like unlearning the idea that someone else is always in charge or knows best.
He gives examples, right? Like Occupy camps.
Yeah, the self-organized structures there, collective decision-making, handling disputes without calling the police, that kind of thing.
And the Hong Kong protest movement's COVID response, too. That was a recent example he used.
Yes, a powerful one. Government was slow, so the movement used its network's contact tracing websites, making masks, sanitizer stations, coordinating strikes.
So combining direct action with mutual aid.
Exactly. Spade presents it as showing what actually works in a crisis and sparking ideas about replacing failing systems with community-controlled alternatives, like a people's infrastructure.
This brings us neatly to a really core idea in the book. Solidarity, not charity. This feels key for anyone trying to grasp mutual aid properly.
It absolutely is. Spade draws a really sharp line here. He argues that traditional charity, aid, relief, social services, they're often top-down.
Meaning
Those with money or power decide who gets help, how much, under what rules. He argues this model often polishes the image of the givers, offers sort of temporary inadequate fixes, and doesn't challenge the underlying problems.
And historically, it's tied to ideas about, like, the deserving poor, where poverty is seen as a personal failing.
Exactly. Wealth implies goodness, poverty implies laziness or immorality, so help comes with strings attached.
Eligibility rules, like you have to be sober or have a certain immigration status or follow certain rules.
Right. Spade is very critical of things like TANF family caps, arguing they're based on racist, sexist ideas about poor women, essentially punishing them for having kids.
He also goes after the modern nonprofit sector quite hard, calls it privatized charity.
Yeah, he argues it gives tax breaks to the rich, lets them steer funding towards causes that don't fundamentally threaten power structures.
Like funding a shelter that requires sobriety, instead of supporting movements challenging why housing is so unaffordable in the first place.
Precisely that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He describes nonprofits competing for grants, needing to show measurable success to funders. This, he suggests, can lead to just managing poverty, not ending it.
And sometimes collecting data from people that puts them at risk.
That too. He even suggests, quite provocatively, that the huge growth of nonprofits from the late 20th century onwards was partly a way to sort of absorb and control the energy of the more radical mutual aid movements of the 60s and 70s.
Wow. Professionalize them, steer them away from challenging the status quo.
That's the argument presented. And the whole having a cause thing promoted by celebrities or companies. Spade sees that as encouraging passive consumption or occasional volunteering, not integrating resistance into daily life.
Okay, so how is mutual aid different then, according to Spade?
By contrast, it's presented as volunteer-run, pushing back against eligibility rules, deeply part of participants' lives, and focused on that shared analysis of root causes. The goal is mobilizing lots of people for big systemic change.
So, bringing it back to basics, it's not just giving someone food, it's understanding why they need food and connecting it to the bigger economic and political system.
Exactly. But Spade is also realistic. He doesn't paint it as perfect. The book talks a lot about the challenges, the potential problems.
Right, it's not automatically smooth sailing.
Definitely not. Groups need to be careful not to replicate harmful dynamics themselves.
He mentions 4 specific dangers, right? Deservingness hierarchies.
Yep. That idea of who deserves help can creep back in, even with good intentions. He uses a FEMA example after a fire, where rules excluded people who were already homeless before the fire, like they were less deserving. Mutual aid groups could do similar things unintentionally.
And saviorism, or paternalism.
That's another big one. The mindset that people in crisis need saving by someone better. It leads to trying to fix people instead of empowering their own solutions.
Like some post-Katrina efforts he mentions.
Yeah, efforts led by outside elites that harmed Black residents. Or welfare-to-work programs with mandatory classes framed as trying to regulate poor people's lives rather than trust them.
Okay, what else? Co-optation.
A huge risk, Spade warns, especially when governments cut services and promote volunteering. Mutual aid can get framed as just filling the gaps left by austerity.
fitting into a kind of conservative dream, as he puts it, where volunteers patch things up while wealth stays concentrated.
Right. He's critical of things like social justice entrepreneurship, apps for aid distribution that make donors feel good but don't tackle root causes, and are often built by the tech industry that contributes to inequality.
He uses criminal justice examples too, doesn't he? How diversion programs can end up expanding control.
Yeah, if they're funded or shaped by police or courts, they can become tools of control, not liberation. Sometimes even cover for expanding state violence infrastructure. He gives a pretty stark example from a youth jail fight in Seattle.
So how do groups avoid that?
He contrasts it with projects like the Oakland Power Projects, training community members affected by police violence and emergency medical care, creating alternatives to calling 911.
Building alternative infrastructure based on resistance, not just patching holes.
Exactly. Staying grounded in that resistance, that root cause analysis, is presented as vital to avoid being swallowed by the system.
Which leads to another major section, the internal health of these groups, how they actually function.
Yeah, and Spade stresses this is critical for sustainability and effectiveness.
The section title, No Masters, No Flakes, kind of sums it up, doesn't it? It's about being really intentional.
It is. He points out most of us are trained in hierarchy school work, so we don't have much practice working together in truly participatory ways.
So building strong internal processes is essential for decisions, participation, handling conflict.
Absolutely. Spade argues it prevents burnout, stops harmful power dynamics from repeating inside the group, and makes the group resilient when challenges hit.
He talks a lot about consensus decision-making.
Yes, it's central for many groups. Not majority rules, but finding solutions everyone can genuinely live with, making sure minority voices aren't just ignored.
Seems like it could be slow.
It can be initially, but the argument in the text is that it leads to stronger decisions because more views are heard, better follow-through because people feel ownership, makes it easier to bring new people in, and stops power concentrating with a few individuals. It also fosters a culture where people want others to participate.
Are there tips for making it work?
Yeah, practical things.
Yeah.
Using small teams, being clear about who makes what decisions, practicing proposals, good facilitation like setting group agreements, making space for feelings, not just tasks.
Welcoming new people seems really important in his view.
Hugely. Framed as the absolute key to building large-scale transformative action. Making groups feel genuinely welcoming and empowering for newcomers is vital.
What about leadership?
He talks about leaderless and leaderful approaches. Building skills widely, transparency, pushing back against status-based leadership ideas.
And money. Does he discuss funding?
He does. Funding can help, obviously, but Spade warns about dependency, losing autonomy, having to please funders, and replicating business-like hierarchies, especially if groups formalize as nonprofits. He suggests volunteer groups might actually be more flexible and honest about limitations.
Burnout is a big one, too. It seems common in this kind of work.
It really is. Spade links it to unresolved conflict, overwork, perfectionism, feeling isolated or like your work isn't valued.
What are the signs in a group?
According to the source, things like resentment, people ignoring group processes, internal competition, martyrdom, controlling behavior, hoarding information, paranoia, overpromising, scarcity thinking, poor boundaries.
So what's the advice?
Prioritize dealing with internal stuff, burnout, conflict, even if it means pausing other work temporarily. Build connection, check workloads. For individuals, have trusted support, understand your own triggers or raw spots from past experiences, maybe seek personal healing.
And conflict. It's bound to happen.
Right? Seen as normal, unavoidable, it often triggers deep reactions. Spade suggests strategies like stepping back, noticing your own feelings, recognizing that while someone's action is a trigger, the intensity might be linked to your own history. And crucially, talk directly to the person involved first, before gossiping or going on social media, which he says almost always makes things worse.
He also tackles perfectionism, calling it a barrier.
Yes, hinders growth, causes conflict, fuels overwork.
Yeah.
He suggests ways to recognize those patterns, and mentions a tool called mad mapping for understanding stress responses.
So wrapping up, how does Spade see mutual aid fitting into the bigger picture?
He frames it as one essential tactic within the broader landscape of social movements. It's not everything, but it's vital for bringing people into collective action, building that people power, and practicing the skills needed for a different kind of world.
The examples he gives of mutual aid supporting direct action kind of show this. like feeding protesters, supporting anti-ICE work that combines aid with campaigns against detention centers.
Exactly. Providing immediate support and building the foundation, the infrastructure, the courage for bolder action against harmful systems. It's about building alternative ways to live and survive together based on solidarity, not profit.
And he ends with that really powerful quote from mutual aid disaster relief about powerlessness being an illusion.
Yeah. The only thing that keeps those in power in that position is the illusion of our powerlessness. A moment of freedom and connection can undo a lifetime of social conditioning.
And scatter seeds in 1,000 directions. It really makes you think, what if that feeling of powerlessness is just an illusion maintained by the powerful? And what if these acts of connection, this mutual aid, can start to dismantle it?
It's a provocative question for you listening, and maybe a more practical one, drawing from this source. Think about the skills you already use every day. Could they be part of building something different, something to chew on after this deep dive?